Hello and welcome back to this broadcast. It's the Executive Network, and we always focus on the principles and the application of those principles of the kingdom of God. We're back at it tonight, and we would like you to follow with us in this discussion. Also, send your thoughts and views on all of this discussion them on our future episode. All right, the last time we met, we spoke about kingdom perspective to vows and oaths, essentially saying that the kingdom of God sees honesty and truth not as an option, but as the only option, as the standard. And we want to continue in that same portion of scriptures and look at other such standards, particularly relation to or with as it concerns relationship. So let's look at it starting from 31st verse of Matthew 5. Okay, so he was talking about divorce, evidently, and he says, you have heard the law that says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But I say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also adultery. Now we have two opinions. Jesus began by saying, you have heard the law that says, so is aware and quoting a provision of law that says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving written notice of divorce. So you can go to legal books and simply bring out that provision of law and says, on the basis of this, I'm going to take so and so action. In fact, the provisions seem to be quite open ended. It just really says, for pretty much any reason, that is, this relationship is no longer working, therefore, let's end it. And the only requirement is to produce or give divorce papers, a written notice that the relationship is coming to an end. So Jesus says, I'm aware of that provision, and I know that perhaps a lot of people might have used that as a way to terminate relationship. In this case, it seems apparent that he's talking about marital relationship. But verse 32 changed the complexion of this argument and said, but I say that. I say that. This is Jesus talking, by the way. And he's saying, I am an authority. I stand as an authority and I give a totally different interpretation, or I present a different standard when to matters of marriage. So, but I say to you that a man who divorces his wife, he has not said don't divorce your wife, but is interpreting that provision of law. Says, let me help you understand what this means. Do not forget that we on previous episode talked about Matthew 17, where it said, don't think that I've come to cancel the law and the prophet. I have not come to cancel or to annul, but to fulfill. Now, that word fulfill, I think we already explained it. It's I need to give you the full meaning and interpretation, the implication, and how this affects and applies to your lives. And maybe one more thing to say, I've actually now come as the fulfillment of the law, which is the grand objective. But every of those interpretations also hold. That is, let me help you understand what this really means, the implication of what this. So it says, if a man divorces his wife, unless she has been faithful, we may need to unpack that bit. By the way, we're looking at the New Living Translation. We can also look at other translations just to help our understanding of that clause, lest she is faithful. It says, if a man divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, then the man causes her to commit adultery. He went on to say, and anyone who marries a divorced woman, adultery. If there is any objection to this, the suggestion or the counsel is you can take it up with Jesus. And the argument needs to be directed back to Jesus and say, Jesus, I don't agree with you. Jesus, I don't accept what you've said. And obviously, that is where that any such divergent viewpoint directed. So this is just really repeating what Jesus has said, nothing more. In other translations, it says, any man who divorces his wife, except for the reason of fornication, try to dig out such a translation just to make sure we have a backing for what we are saying. Said, except for the reason of fornication. And by that interpretation, that would mean how can you would ask a question, how can people who are already married, they're already called husband and wife, and the marriage has been consummated, how can you commit adultery? I mean, a fornication rather. That is physically, practically possible because fornication would be a thing only to the unmarried. And I think that makes sense because if you go back to Old Testament, where this matter was elaborated upon, scriptures there were saying that the whole idea is we expect all of our youth to live in sanctity, preserve themselves, i.e., abstain from sex before marriage. That is the standard that the Old Testament espouses and sought to uphold. So the idea is, well, if two people who supposedly have not experienced act of conjugation, I mean, any sexual relations before marriage, when they come together, the expectation is both of them are giving themselves to each other in that original state. So it says, if upon finding that, oh, wait a minute, that was not the case. And as it were, it happened to be that, well, perhaps you could say that it would have been probably easier to detect that for the female. Because if a man had had conjugal relations. Not quite sure that was a way to know physically, but in the anatomy of the female, yes, quite possibly, because if you would excuse me, biologically there is a covering. So if that was broken, it will be apparent that this had happened, and so that will have been that okay, this man had somehow got on with someone for taking a husband. So in that tradition, well, you would find that out it was not even only just Jewish tradition. I can also say in the African tradition and even in the old European traditions, in most ancient traditions, you will find that same thing. I'd probably say maybe in ancient traditions around the world, that would have been a practice that don't expect singles that experience the act of sexual intercourse before marriage. So it's against that backdrop, a tradition which was quite common to literally every civilization, every groupings of people, every grouping of people. So it's again against that, not only in the Middle East, not only in the Jewish culture, literally all around. They were saying that if that was the case, well, on the marital night of marriage, when consummation was expected to happen for the first time, if it was now found out that oh, someone had already gotten with another person previously, particularly the woman, said that will have been the ground to solve the marriage or the betrothal. And I know for sure the culture I came up from, I mean, the part of the African culture that was the ancient practice. I don't know your own backgrounds, but if you go back, I'm not talking about 50 years ago. No, I'm talking about maybe hundreds of years ago, maybe even thousands of years ago. Whatever your culture is, that I'm sure something similar might have been practiced. So you're saying, well, back also that culture, if that happened, then that would have been grounds enough to divorce or to end the marriage. Do you remember that in the case of Joseph and Mary, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Joseph, the adoptive father, that was also what happened. So Mary was said to have been found with child, that is, she was pregnant. And because customarily that was not expected, she was pregnant before they had had the first um, night with Joseph. So Joseph, we're told, wanted to secretly just end it, not want to publicly shame Mary, because that could also have had some vital consequences back then. So he wanted to do that. But the angel of God appeared to Joseph and said, no, please don't do that. This is the explanation to the pregnancy that you're seeing with Mary. And the back of that, Joseph did what he did, which actually earned him the legal right to become father of Jesus, layman terms. And I'm just explaining that that was also a situation where Joseph could have legally divorced Mary, but the intervention, divine intervention. So it's talking about what this is. Now, Jesus said, but I say to you, that is, I know that this there's this provision that's there. Do you know that if somehow the man realizes, just like Joseph realized that, and he says, you know what, I'm still happy to take you as my wife, I accept you, that would have been the end of the matter. And certainly, Mary became remained the wife of Joseph, and she went on, they both went on to have other children who were told that the brothers of Jesus, sisters of Jesus. So they were happily married from that point onward. So, but if Joseph was insisting that no, I'm not having this, I need to end it, that would have been the end of it. And Joseph would have been acting on his right, having a relation. So I'm saying that Jesus said, I'm aware of this provision. But even the fact that there was unfaithfulness, well, you still have a decision to make. You could act, say, no, I'm not having it anymore. Or if you choose to overlook it, say, it's okay, I forgive it. That let us go. I'm happy for us to move. Said, well, marriage will be preserved. And from that point onwards, it will be impossible to commit fornication because now you're married. Maybe you went on to consummate the marriage, and that will have been the end of it. So, in the mind of Jesus, if you really look at the implication of this, what he's saying is once you're married, unless life ends, then you are there. Now, I know that we could have a lot of argument and say, how about if the husband is not happy or the wife is not happy? All of that. According to the edict of Jesus, no, that those are not the grounds for ending. Neglecting me is neglecting me. All of is abusing me. Now, I'm not encouraging unfaithfulness. I'm not encouraging abuse or any of those things. I'm saying if you look at this text and just come at it objectively and just look at what it says, reading the words of Jesus, that is the implication. That is what we draw out of it. Jesus did not say, I'm forcing you to do this. No, he says, I'm saying to you, I'm explaining to you. If you have ears to hear, you can hear. If you refuse to hear it, it's on you. It's not saying I'm forcing you and holding you to it. It's just telling you what it is. That is, let me give you the correct interpretation of this law. What you then do with it, consequently, is your choice. So there's, but I say to you that a man who divorces his wife, unless he has been unfaithful, unless she has been unfaithful. So as though the onus is placed on the female, unless she has been unfaithful. I mean, well, you could say, how about if the man has been unfaithful? Somehow that was not written here. This is not an excuse for men, males, to be unfaithful. Absolutely not. In fact, if we go back to Malachi, we see that that matter was also addressed, where it says, you cannot deal preciously wife of your. So no one is excused when it comes to this. But he says, look, the only ground is what I've said. Otherwise, you are now causing the woman to commit adultery. And committing adultery would now make sense because someone who's already married If the person gets with somebody else, then that is not fornication. That then will be adultery, because that will be a married person that is having, a sexual relation with somebody else. That is the classic definition of adultery. And he went on to say, and anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. So even the man now, so just in case anybody is thinking, oh, men are exempt. No, no man is exempt. Said a man who then goes on to marry the divorced woman also commit. Jesus did not say anything anymore. He left it there. What would that mean? He's saying, look, I've informed you, I've presented information. I leave you to make a choice. And I would do just that, and I will say no more and leave it right there. So, it's kingdom standard. Of course, the other time we spoke about not um, vows and all that, but let's keep that and go to verse 38 of Matthew, where Jesus, still talking about kingdom standards for relationships, is now talking about the matter of vengeance, taking revenge. Verse 38 says, you have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury. That is, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And he's saying, look, the, what the law is really trying to say is there has to be balance. There has to be equivalence. The scale of justice must be balanced. That's the, the goal of justice. Except that what the law is trying to do, as good as it is, does not actually bring that balance in the real sense. So Jesus says, but I say again, say, he's not saying, I am telling you. And I think we've already addressed why he would be saying, one could say, well, what right have you to be saying all these things? Don't forget that Jesus is not just in the shape of Moses, he's not just a prophet or a priest like you'd have Aaron or the other prophet that you have in the Bible. No, this is the king talking. And we've said that in kingdom terms, a king is head of government. A king is the fountain of justice. It is the justice you are trying to implement, to execute. The king is, in fact, the standard of justice. The king is the fountain, the origin, the, I'll use this word, dictator of justice. Is the one who dictates what is just. And that's why in our democratic environment, it's very hard to know how to relate to kings. The reason is there is no human king who can fully embody this as God Himself would. Just for the simple fact that they are humans and therefore fallible. People make mistakes. But the King of Kings, in whom that Jesus fully embodies, is the standard of righteousness, the standard of justice. Therefore, perfection is in Him. So, when He says, I say to you, That is the law itself talking. That is the righteousness of the law himself talking. That is the justice of the law itself talking. He said, I say to you, do not resist. This is very challenging. I tell you what, particularly in our day where we believe in the right of the individual for self preservation, for the preservation of properties, this is a very challenging position to take. King is talking now. He says, but I say to you, do not resist. He went on to explain. He says, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. What does that mean? Does that mean take a slap here, on the other one, get another slap? Well, on that one, get another slap, and yet another one. I want to assume that this is an allegory, a metaphor, which the previous sentence already says. But I say to you, do not resist evil person. The idea is that for kingdom citizens, people who will be accepting of the privilege of living in God's kingdom, that it is possible that serious situation can arise. And he's saying that we are not to put the law into our hands, as it were. I know this is very difficult to talk about. I look at myself and I'm saying, check, I'm looking at my temperament. I'm thinking is very, how many times someone insulted you and you couldn't wait for the person to land, giving it back? Like, you know what, don't mess with me. That is the tendency of some of us. That is the tendency that most of us have. And it says, look, if you are sued court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat. Jesus, is humanly possible, except that it is actually not humanly possible. Something else is going on here, which we would need to understand. But verse 21 says, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. So the history there is back then, because they were under Roman occupation, therefore you have soldiers who were posted to the towns, keep the peace. So if a soldier was traveling, firstly, we have his military kit. If the soldier says, hey, you come here, take my kit and carry it after me, by law, you have to comply, you have to obey. And that was because the occupiers of the time, they had no respect. Absolutely. They dehumanized people that they were whose land they were occupying. And Jesus knew that. He's saying, I know this is the kind of treatment, and I know most of you are very upset about it. Saying, I know and I accept that what they're doing absolutely wrong. It's evil. But the approach I would say is don't fight back. You could argue that some people have tried it. So you people who've heard about likes of Mahatma Gandhi, other people practice that kind of non-violent, just just decide that we're not going to fight. We're going to wear you out. We're going to let you exhaust your wickedness. Do you know that with this, it tends to come at a very high price. That's why I say that the the human nature does not lend itself very well to this. Except that somehow, unless God, unless Christ Himself was living in us and working out His ability in us, just do not know how a regular human being could do. And that perhaps is the that Jesus always wanted to kind of us, so that whatever He is demanding or requesting or suggesting, He is wanting to perform that in us through His own ability. Let me try and finish that up. So it says, give to those who ask. Don't turn away from those who want to. It's a very broad statement. So, and the idea is, if somebody asks you and asks for something and you think this person is not worthy of it, the tendency is think I'm not giving this. You're wasteful. You're this, you're that. But just saying, if someone is asking you, and then ask the question, what if that person seems to be wanting to take advantage or cheat? Is Jesus asking not to be discerning? And here is where we balance scripture with scripture. I know that Psalm 112 is also a word from the king. It says that the wise man looks into his matter, he will guide his affairs with discretion. He gives, he has dispersed abroad, he has given to the poor. So, this is not uh, a call to be undiscerning, as I say. Absolutely, and we'll see that in chapter 6, where it says, you give your arms to that is that is encouraged. But it appears to me, please, I would like to have your input. It appears to me that he was still talking in the context of people who are oppressing them. Because what those guys would do, those occupiers would do, those Roman soldiers, if they saw a good shirt on you, they say, hey, give me that shirt. They can take it off you. And if you did not, well, they could deal with you very harshly. They says if they are demanding that, meaning oppression will not last forever. And if you are weak, if the balance of power is not weighted on your side, persevere, uh, outlive that situation. Don't allow that oppression to crush you and take you out before at the cost witness the turn of event. And isn't this also true that at times, maybe in the workplace, maybe in other situations where people definitely have more power than you do, more influence, and they could use those influence and power against you in a way that is very subtle, and you may not be able to. You wouldn't have any particular legal recourse. So he's saying at times we've been in a position where outliving the oppression or the disadvantageous situation the way to go. Obviously, obviously, that's why I say that the scriptures also balances itself out. Times when if there is proper legal recourse or proper remediation, yes, I would assume that that should be taken. I.e., I do not need someone to put his leg on my neck or my head and crush it. I can gently move the leg away and say, "Hey, enough." But then I read this: "Don't resist evil person." Please, I think context is right here. This is context of what the people are facing at the time. where they were under occupation or being oppressed by a power that they could not physically fight against, overcome that way. And it happened for a long time. Only God knows how many people will have been so much injured, so faced a lot of very bad experiences. But as we know, all through it, it is impossible a people down forever. Oppression would always be outlasted, whether you like it or not. Yes, in the intervening period, a lot of people might have paid the sacrifice. Yes, that's a distinct possibility. But Jesus here is is raising a standard in a question that ought to be considered, and it's something that challenges our view of something to really think about. Let's move on to verse 43. It says, "You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemies." I tell you, at that time, these people had a reason not only to hate the occupiers, but to hate anyone who was aiding them. So there are people who are called the tax farmers. They are the ones that will collect tax from their own people, acting on behalf of the occupiers. And they hate. One of such people was Matthew, that Jesus called to be disciple. Of course, that's also Zacchaeus. And you could see that when these people were confronted with the love of Jesus, life changed. So Jesus is saying, look, I say to you, love your enemies. The people that ordinarily you believe you have a reason to hate them, said, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Remember that verse 3 to 10 or 12 of Matthew 5, you're saying, blessed are ye, or good news to those who are being persecuted for righteousness. Now saying, you know what? Pray for those persecuted. He said, in that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in. Jesus is not raising us to a standard of good and evil, of right and he is in fact putting us on a different platform where the standard is not right and wrong, good and evil. No, he's saying there is a whole different standard that precedes right and wrong, good and evil. It's a standard of perfection. It's a standard, how do I explain it? That precedes. It is saying, let me take you back to your original state of being. And that is not just saying, this is right, this is wrong. No. It's a state of perfection. It's a state of, the word I wanted to use is original, where you are constant and independent of circumstance. Now, I know this is a bit hard to explain. We're saying that your value, I want to take you back to a place where your value is constant, notwithstanding situation, circumstance. What I say to you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. He now explains the character of the Father. That's what I'm saying. He wants to take us back to it. Is a place of beginning our character, which is in fact the character of God. It says, therefore, your Father in heaven, He gives His sunlight to both the evil and the good. So He's saying, I want to take you beyond responding to good and evil. I want to take you beyond that to a different kind of standard. And this different kind of standard is exactly the kingdom standard of relationship. This is really the heart of discourse tonight. That God wants to make us operate at a different pedestal that is not just about good, evil, right, and wrong, but that of the perfection of the Father. That is independent of the action and the inactions of other people. It's your Father. He sees both the good and the evil, but he still gives them a sunlight. Very interesting. Is able to say, I look at the human. Say, what does the human need? I'm a father to the human. I am not accepting his behavior, but I have the responsibility to this person as a father. This is indeed a different standard, a different way of viewing people, seeing people. And he sends rain on the just, the unjust alike. It now goes on, verse 46. It says, if you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? See, he's saying, I don't, I want it to go beyond just being affected by other people's behavior. And this is why I say this is a totally different standard. It has to be the standard of life that we had before we experienced the fall of Adam, change in the nature of Adam, before we started to manifest the human nature. Because the human nature responds to good and evil. If you do something good to me, I'll be nice to you. If you do something bad, I will react. If you love those who love you, what reward is there for that? That even corrupt tax collectors do that much. Knew that they didn't like the tax collectors. Verse 47. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone? You see, he's saying there is this general ways which human beings have come to accept what relationships should look like. But I'm calling you to a different standard. I'm asking you to come up to a different standard. That even the pagans do that. They love their friends too. Verse 48 now sums it up. That, but you are to be perfect, even as your Father is. How does the Father exercise his perfection? It says, he does good, both to the good, and that is, he gives his sunlight and his rain, both to the good, just, and both to the deserving. Jesus calls that the perfect. Now, you and I would think we should agree that this is not the kind of human nature that we have inherited from Adam. It must then be the nature of the Father restored to us that will enable us to function this way. That is exactly why Jesus said, don't think I've come to cancel the law and the prophet. I've come for it. Give you the capacity to fulfill it by being the fulfillment of the law for you, and that you will then have to put me on or internalize me. I will have to come and live inside of you and then function as that kind of life expressed to you. This is what it means by that was the true light that gives light to everyone. Him was life. And that life is the life that is expressed for men. Light. In him was life. Life was the light. Light shines in darkness. And darkness, that is, the human nature does not understand this kind of light. They behave that way. Well, it's the difference kind of light. This is what we have been called. This is what we are to embrace, and not meant to be a struggle. It is meant to be acceptance, life of Christ. We can't earn it. We can't walk away and exercise self-control. It's going to be stumbling upon stumbling upon stumbling. Rather, we are meant to accept this life as a life that's been given to us, just like unto us the Son has been given. The Son that's given to us has this perfection. And the privilege of our life is to accept this perfection of the Father rest in. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm very interested in having your comments because we've covered a range of topics, and I hope that you get to see them some and drop those on YouTube page or drop them to those who are on our WhatsApp platform. Drop your comment. Let's see what you think, and I hope it does them so. God bless you. Thanks for joining us.